First of all, what do I think personally? I think my other panelists might disagree. Is capitalism the highest form? I hope not. But first of all, we will need to be in a situation where basically we have abolished scarcity. Until we have that, as Trotsky brilliantly put it in The Revolution Betrayed, when you have shortages, queues form. Then a policeman is called to keep order. He never fails to help himself first. So, and I think that I ignored the problem when I chose to leap into Marxism. I knew already, as a PhD in economics, who really believed in it also, that scarcity was not going to be abolished easily. And with the new things we have seen that Frank Froede thinks haven't happened, the productivity gains, we have so many more things we want all over the world. And we are not, of course we could want less. I am happy I no longer want plastic bags, and I'm perfectly willing to have a cloth bag I carry around, and it doesn't have to have a label. Now, but the point is that we can want somewhat less, and maybe that's one of the things we will get out of this long period of deleveraging, that we will learn to live with less and with more leisure, which we didn't learn to do, and we will have, there are some positive sides to it, but it will be not in our lifetimes, and I don't think in your children's lifetimes, not even the youngest people in the room. But someday I hope that many things will be, again, as Trotsky said, like a well-mannered boarding house. But I personally, as somebody who tends at a well-mannered boarding house to take the eggs I like first, I have to be careful and think, yes, first there have to be enough eggs for everybody. And that's the, I don't want to, my answer to the other is, do we even live under capitalism? That is a definitional question, and I don't think that it is relevant unless you are a Marxist. I want to know if it's good or not first. Then we can work out what it is. And again, social democracy, no, I think social democracy has to decide what it's doing. That one of the problems was that what I call social democracy and what I came to next decided instead to buy into the bubble and the boom. And it needs to find its way back. And I hope that people like Tristram will be part of that. Because they went from the right of me to the left of me to the right of me in a whiz, and many of you others may have felt that. I think there is a role for government in the banks, for example. I think I'll stop.
Okay, thanks, Judith. Frank,
I could
yes.
go on,
Yeah.
yes.
I think that you can blame social democracy for many, many bad things, but not for causing the problems, because the interesting thing is that no matter what the government is, whether it's a Reagan-led government or a Christian Democratic-led government in Germany, or a social democratic government in France or in England, we see a similar pattern of relying more and more on the credit mechanism. We see a situation where under Reagan and Thatcher, you had the securitization of the credit system. Under Reagan, in the earlier period, you have actually an increase in state expenditure for a certain period of time, but state expenditure not necessarily for welfare payments, but for armaments and for other areas. So I think it's important to realize that there is no government in the Western capitalist world that didn't buy into this policy, whose consequences we're now paying for. I haven't sort of come across any of that in the 70s and the 80s and the early 90s. I think that the really important thing for us to remember here is that the state can be used for all kinds of reasons. At the moment, we have the wrong balance. A state ought to be providing resources for productive investments, like the way that Labour did for the Channel Tunnel in the 70s, or the way that the French have done with high-speed trains. But instead of doing that, we're spending state expenditure on transfer payments in a way that has got no productive outcomes or consequences. And I think we do need to have a very serious discussion of the balance between private capital and the state that at the moment all the political parties are avoiding.
George, quickly.
Very quickly. I mean, I sort of just want to endorse, pretty much everything that Judith said. I'm not going to repeat it. I thought it was eloquently put. as an economist, sorry, it's a bit nerdy, right? But that's kind of what I do. But the standard text now about what do we know about financial crises and why do they happen and how do they behave and how do you get over them is now a book by two American economists called Rogoff and Reinhard. It's called 8 Centuries of Financial Crises. 8 Centuries of Financial Crises. This time it's different, i.e. it never is different. And I think, Frank's point, which is that it didn't really matter what kind of political system it was, whether it was social democracy, whether it was free market, whether it was, whatever it was. I mean, everybody suffered from the same problem. And the problem is, just deregulation, in my opinion. That actually the idea about that you could free up those animal spirits in finance and expect human behavior to control itself. I mean, it's a human problem. And it's something that is, it's a serial human problem that goes back to the days of Rome and even before. It's not a uniquely capitalistic problem. It's exaggerated by capitalism because of the nature of it. But I think that the idea that as I said before, there are lots of interesting ideas about, whether it's, mutual societies or, cooperatives. But, having state banks, the Chinese banks were mentioned before. The Chinese banks are insolvent. So, and the only way that they stay in business is because they get continuously bankrolled by the state. That's not the answer either.
Okay. Quickly, Robin.
I rather think it is absolutely the answer. I think one of the marvelous things about the crisis is we suddenly realize money, which used to be that great thing that there was such a huge lack of, that actually governments can just conjure it into existence and can endow other institutions with it. So instead of them using it to endow commercial banks, I would rather think the network of social funds, that would be a much more creative way to use it. And I think it sort of provides some of the answer to the question, can we do better? I think if we look at the world, there's too much misery, far too much. And I think it would be wrong for Judith to imply that we can sort of live with that and imagine the market will spontaneously solve it. The market hasn't solved it. So I think we've got to tackle it deliberately. I'm just back from Brazil and Ecuador, and I can say those countries have seen inequality sharply reduced in the last 10 years because there are radical social democratic governments that haven't given up the ghost, as sadly most European social democrats have done, and have taken really stern steps to spread economic initiative to show that there is such a thing as public entrepreneurialism that can tackle problems and get the economy moving.